Rain poured over the steel rooftops of Varney's colony. The streets were mostly empty, except for broken crates, flickering lights, and shadows that didn't move. Captain John Vell walked with his coat pulled tight, his boots splashing through puddles on the metal floor panels. He wasn't in the mood to stop. Not in this part of the colony, but something made him slow down. A soft sound, like a whisper, came from a narrow alley on his left. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was a leaking pipe or a malfunctioning vent. Then he heard it again, low, shivering breaths, almost like a child crying. John turned his head, frowning. He stepped closer to the alley, where the dim orange glow of a half-broken streetlight barely reached. There, sitting between two trash bins, was a small figure wrapped in what looked like a thermal blanket. But it wasn't a proper one. It was torn, soaked, and barely covered her thin frame. Her skin was a soft lavender shade, glowing faintly in the dark. Alien, definitely. But she was small, maybe 7 or 8 years old in human terms. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide and glowing pale blue. She didn't speak right away, just stared at him with fear and hope. At the same time, her hair was wet and stuck to her face, and her arms were wrapped in dirty bandages. John raised his hands slowly, showing he wasn't there to hurt her. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not here to harm you." She didn't run, but her body trembled more. John knelt a few feet away, trying to look smaller. "What's your name?" he asked, but she said nothing. Then she did something he didn't expect. She stood up, wobbled forward on unsteady legs, and reached for his coat. With weak fingers, she tugged at the corner of it. Her voice was soft, shaky, and broken. "Can I call you Dad? Please?" John blinked, stunned. His heart skipped. He looked around, thinking maybe someone was playing a joke, but there was no one. Just the sound of dripping rain and her fragile voice still echoing in his head. He stared at her, at the sadness in her face. She looked so tired, so cold, like she hadn't eaten in days. Her feet were bare, her knees scraped, and she held on to him like he was the last thing keeping her from falling. "Dad?" She whispered again, and then collapsed. John caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was light as a feather. Too light. She was burning with fever. Even though she was soaked in cold rain, he looked down at her tiny face resting against his chest, and something inside him shifted. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she said those words, but he knew he couldn't leave her there. John stood up, carrying her in his arms. She didn't move, just breathed softly. He pulled his coat tighter around her and started walking toward his ship. The rain still fell, but now he didn't care. Back on his freighter, the last light. He laid her gently on the medbed. The ship's AI, a calm female voice, scanned her vitals. "Subject is malnourished," the AI said. "Fever present, mild injuries detected." John sighed and leaned against the wall. Who was this girl? And why did she call him Dad? It didn't make sense. He hadn't seen her species in years, not since a peace mission long ago. His mind flashed to a face he hadn't remembered in a long time. An alien woman with soft lavender skin and glowing eyes. They had shared one night, one memory. He never thought he'd see anything from that moment again. The AI beeped. "Captain, a partial DNA match has been detected." John's eyes widened. "What?" he asked, stepping closer. "Her genetic markers share 47% match with yours." The AI confirmed. "That is highly unusual." John stared at the sleeping girl. His heartbeat grew loud in his ears. Was it possible? Could this child be his? He didn't know for sure, but one thing was certain. She needed him now. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the ship, for the first time in years, Captain John Vell felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A reason to stay. A reason to protect, maybe even a reason to live again. John didn't sleep that night. He sat near the medbed, watching the strange little girl breathe softly under the blanket. The ship's soft hum and the blinking lights of the control panel were the only sounds in the room. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, time felt frozen. The AI had confirmed a partial DNA match. That meant something, even if John didn't know what yet. He stared at the readout on the med-screen: gene markers, protein links, blood compatibility. It looked complicated, but the truth behind it was simple. She wasn't just some random lost alien child. She had his blood. How is that even possible? He whispered to himself. The AI answered automatically. Most likely explanation: offspring from a cross-species union. John's mind went back again 10 years ago. A remote border station. A brief mission of peace. He had been younger. More hopeful, he met an alien diplomat, a woman named Leora. Their time was short but unforgettable. He left the next morning, and life moved on. Or so he thought. Now this child, this girl named Riley, was lying here on his ship, calling him Dad. He didn't know if he was ready for what that meant, but ready or not, it had already begun. The next morning, she woke slowly, her eyes opened, blinking against the ship's soft ceiling lights. John was sitting nearby with a warm drink in his hand. She sat up weakly and looked around, confused. "You're safe," John said quietly. "You're on my ship." She looked at him for a long moment, then looked down. Her voice was a little clearer now. "Where is this ship going?" she asked. He smiled gently, trying not to overwhelm her. "Nowhere yet," he said. "We're still parked, just making sure you're okay." She nodded slowly, pulling the blanket around herself. Then she reached into the pocket of her torn clothes and took out something small. It was a locket, dented and scratched. She handed it to him carefully. "My mama said I should give this to you," she whispered. John took the locket and opened it. Inside was a small, faded hologram, his own face, standing next to Leroy, the alien woman he had almost forgotten. His breath caught. This wasn't a coincidence. Lyra must have known, must have remembered him. Riley's voice trembled. She said, "You wear metal on your heart?" She pointed to his chest where his captain's badge hung. John looked down, then back at her. "I remember your mother," he said slowly. "She was kind, brave, and strong." Riley's eyes filled with tears. "She's gone now," she whispered. "She told me to find you." Before she closed her eyes, John reached out and took her small hand in his. "I'm so sorry," he said. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Her lip quivered. But she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him with a strange hope. "Are you really my dad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. John looked at her and nodded. "I think I am," he said softly. "And if I'm not, I'll still protect you. Always." She nodded too, and for the first time, she leaned against him, resting her head on his arm. He didn't move. Afraid he might break the moment, a little warmth spread inside him, strange, unexpected, but welcome. Later that day, John called the AI again. "I want a full report," he said. "Every test, every marker, run it again." The AI obeyed. And an hour later, the final results came in. Confirmation. 48% shared DNA with Captain John Vell. Analysis complete. Subject is biological offspring with 99.4% certainty. John didn't say anything. He just stared at the report. Then at the sleeping girl. He had a daughter. He really had a daughter. But why hadn't Lyra told him? Why had she sent the child alone? And who had hurt them? Too many questions still hung in the air like smoke. But one thing was clearly was his now. And whatever had happened to Lyra, someone was going to pay. John stood and looked out the window into the dark sky. The colony below still buzzed. With crime, trade, and shadows, he didn't care about the danger. He had someone to fight for now. He turned back, watching the girl breathe softly. he whispered to himself. No one's taking you from me. Not ever again. Riley stood in the ship's small kitchen, staring at a steaming cup of soup. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the mug, but her face was calm. John watched from the corner, letting her have space. She was still fragile, but she was trying to be strong. That morning, she had asked him a simple question. Do you want to know what my mother told me before she died? He had nodded, heart heavy. Now she was ready to answer. She took a careful sip, then walked to the small table where John was sitting. She climbed into the seat opposite him, her legs swinging above the floor. There was something different in her eyes today, not just sadness, but weight, memories, pain, and strength, all mixed together. She didn't speak much at the end. Riley said softly, she was bleeding. I tried to stop it, but I'm small. John didn't interrupt. He just listened. Silently, she held my hand. Riley continued, and she said, I had to find you, she said. You wore metal on your heart, and your eyes were like stars. John blinked, surprised. That was something Lyra used to say years ago. When they sat under alien moons together, she called his eyes star-burned. A human fire she admired. She gave me the locket, Riley added, she told me. If I ever saw you, to ask you if I could call you Dad. Her fingers clutched the mug tighter. She said you'd say yes, because you have an old soul. John leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Your mother was right, he said gently. I do say yes. Riley smiled faintly, her lips twitching, as if unsure how to do it. She also said, you'd probably act tough. But your heart is soft like fruit inside armor. John chuckled once, shaking his head. That sounds just like her, he whispered. There was silence for a moment, the hum of the ship, the occasional beep from the system console. All faded as John looked at his daughter. Then she added something he didn't expect. She said if anything happens to her, someone might come after me. John stiffened. Who? He asked sharply. She didn't say names. Riley replied, just bad people. Riley, he said carefully, did your mother tell you why someone would want to hurt you? The girl shook her head slowly. I think it's because of me, she said. She said I'm a mistake to some people, a symbol to others. John's jaw tightened. That could only mean one thing. Half-breed children were rare. Many species didn't accept cross-race unions, even if peace was signed on paper. Old hatred lived in dark places, and someone clearly didn't want Riley alive. He stood up and turned to the ship's console AI. It's gone recent communications traffic in the colony. Keywords, half-breed, child, and my name. Working, the AI replied. Seconds passed. Then Captain, flagged messages detected. One local bounty request for unidentified alien-human hybrid. John's fists clenched. They had put a price on her. His own daughter really looked nervous. Am I in trouble? She asked quietly. No. John said immediately, turning to her. You're under trouble, but I'm standing between it and you. He tapped the controls and activated defense protocols. Shields went up, blast doors sealed, motion sensors kicked in. No one would get in not without stepping over his body first. John sat back down and took her hand across the table. You're not a mistake, he said firmly. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Tears formed in Riley's glowing eyes. But she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him with something new. Trust. She said you'd protect me, she whispered. Even if the world turned dark, I will, John promised. Even if the stars go out. The moment settled between them, warm and unshakable. Then the AI beeped again. Captain. External motion detected near Dock 7, 3 heat signatures. John stood, grabbing his blaster and motioning for Riley to hide behind the bulkhead wall. The girl didn't argue, she obeyed quickly. Tucking herself behind a storage crate, John moved to the door, blaster ready, eyes cold. Whoever was out there had made a mistake. They came for a child, but they'd meet a soldier. They wanted to take what was his. But they had no idea who he was, and tonight they would find out. Asterisk, it started with the trash collector who didn't return. Then a pipe in John's corridor exploded without warning. Next, someone tried to slice into his fuel line during the night. Each time, he fixed the damage silently, but his instincts screamed louder. This wasn't bad luck. Someone was probing his defenses. Someone who knew he had the girl. Varney's colony was known for trade, mining, and shadow deals. Underneath the shiny towers and blinking signs lived something rotten. Gangs, smugglers, and slavers moved like rats in the dark, and now John had something more, someone they wanted. Inside his ship, Rayleigh sat in the co-pilot's chair with her legs crossed. Humming softly, she didn't understand the danger fully. John wanted to keep it that way, but each time she laughed, he feared it might be the last time she smiled freely. He walked into the bridge. Checking the scanner screens, still 3 unidentified pings hovered near the docking ring. There, watching us, he muttered. Cowards really turned to him, tilting her head. Are you mad? No, kiddo, he replied, kneeling beside her. Just focused. Then the terminal buzzed an incoming transmission. It wasn't encrypted. John tapped to answer it. The screen flickered, and a face appeared, an alien male with golden scales, a thin smile, and cold eyes. Captain Vel, the voice said smoothly. I believe you have something that belongs to the market. John didn't answer. The alien leaned forward on the screen. We don't want trouble, he said. Hand over the girl, and you'll be well compensated. He smiled wider, showing sharpened teeth. She's not even pure, you know? John's hand hovered near the console's weapon trigger. She's not property, he said coldly. She's a child. She's a contract. The alien snapped. You don't know what she carries in her blood, do you? Power, threat, prophecy depends on who's paying. The transmission cut off. John stared at the dark screen, his blood boiling. They weren't just after her for money. They believed she was some kind of key, maybe political, maybe ancient. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. John activated lockdown mode. Every hatch sealed, every alarm armed, every trap activated. Then he checked the weapon locker and loaded 3 extra clips. He wasn't letting anyone touch her, not while he breathed. Later that evening, he sat beside Riley as she played with a broken datapad he gave her. She was trying to fix it with a tiny screwdriver, tongue sticking out as she concentrated. You're good with tools, John said. She smiled shyly. Mama taught me. She said I have curious fingers. He looked at her, and for a moment, he forgot the danger outside, but it didn't last. Because that night, the ship shook. BOOM, one of the landing gears, exploded. Red lights flashed as the internal systems screamed. John grabbed Riley in one arm and dashed to the medroom. Hide inside the pod, he said firmly, opening the stasis chamber. But Dad. No arguments, he said, locking her inside gently. I'll come back. Then he ran to the cargo bay, where the outer blast door was already creaking. Someone was trying to force their way in. John drew his blaster and took cover. Eyes locked on the door, it burst open, and 3 figures stormed into armed thugs and 1 alien with glowing eyes. John didn't wait. He opened fire 2 blasts. Straight to the lead attacker's chest. The second ducked but took a shot in the leg. Screaming, the third ran for cover, but John was already advancing. His movements were clean, trained, brutal. This wasn't a simple pirate raid. This was a father defending his child. He grabbed one attacker by the collar, slammed him into the wall, and growled, "Who sent you?" The thug coughed, bleeding. "Everyone wants her. She's worth stars." John threw him down and sealed the blast door again. Then he returned to the pod and opened it. Riley jumped into his arms, her face pale. "Are we okay?" she asked. He held her tight. "We're alive," he said. "And that's all that matters." He carried her to the captain's chair and sat with her curled in his lap. "We might have to leave this place soon," he said softly. "Where will we go?" she asked. He looked at the stars beyond the glass. "Somewhere quiet," he whispered. "Where you can be a child, not a target, but deep inside." He knew peace wouldn't come easy. Not while they still hunted her. Not until the underworld learned that some things some people can't be bought, especially not his daughter. The engines hummed gently as John's ship glided through the empty lanes between trade sectors. No more cities, no more dark alleys, no more bounty hunters for now, at least. The galaxy outside was still dangerous, but inside this ship, peace had returned. And for the first time, Riley was beginning to smile. She wore one of John's oversized t-shirts, sleeves rolled up and tied. Her lavender skin was healthier now. The bruises fading, the fear retreating from her eyes. She followed John around the ship like a tiny shadow, curious, silent, always watching. One morning, he found her sitting in the corner of the engine room. She was holding a broken tool, trying to copy how he had repaired the coolant pipe the day before. He crouched beside her and asked, "You like fixing things?" She nodded shyly. "I like learning." Mama said curious fingers grow smart minds. John smiled and handed her a real wrench. "Well, let's grow that mind of yours," he said. The next few days were different, lighter. John started teaching her small tasks, how to close circuits, how to seal tubing, how to read the navigation lights. Riley picked it up fast. She wasn't just curious. She was sharp, observant, and eager to impress him. One night, she brought him a data pad. On the screen was a rough drawing she had made, using her fingers. It showed a stick figure of John and a smaller alien girl standing beside him. Above them were the words, written clumsily, "Dad plus me." John stared at it for a long moment. Then, without saying a word, he reached out and pulled her into a hug. She held on tight, like she'd never let go. "You're my girl now," he whispered, "and I'm your dad, no matter what." That night, she slept in his bunk with the drawing under her pillow for the first time since she arrived. She didn't cry in her sleep. The next morning, John made pancakes. It was a rare treat, synthetic flour and protein syrup cooked on a hot plate. Really took one bite and her eyes lit up. "This tastes like a hug," she said. John laughed. "That's how you know it's real food," he replied later. They played a simple board game from Earth, one with colored squares and dice. Really didn't understand all the rules at first, but she giggled every time she rolled a 6. John hadn't heard laughter like that in years. But even in that calm, shadows still lived in the corners of the ship. Every time a proximity sensor beeped, Really would flinch. She didn't show it often. But John noticed her hands shook slightly when she heard loud noises. Sometimes she stared at closed doors for too long, as if expecting someone to break them down. One evening, she asked him, "Dad, if I'm not full human, does that make me wrong?" John stopped what he was doing, walked over, and knelt in front of her. "Look at me," he said gently. She did, her eyes unsure. "You're not wrong," he said firmly. "You're rare, special, and strong. But people said I'm a mix," she whispered. "Like I don't belong anywhere." John took her hands in his. "Then we'll make a place," he said. "Right here, on this ship, just for us. No one gets to decide who you are, except you." She nodded slowly, then leaned forward and hugged him tightly. He held her eyes closed, his hand gently stroking her soft hair. There was no war here, no mission, no enemy. Just a father and his daughter. And that was enough. Later, Riley sat near the window, watching the stars drift by. John sat beside her, sipping hot tea. She looked at him and smiled a real smile, bright and full of peace. "Dad?" she asked. "Yes, starling." If we ever find a world where I can run and play, can we stop there? John looked at her and nodded. Not only stop, he said, we'll build something there. A garden, a home, whatever you want, really. Closed her eyes and leaned on his arm. I want to swing, she whispered. And flowers, you got it, John said softly. Flowers and a swing. For my little mechanic, the ship sailed on through space, and though they were still alone out there, they no longer felt lost, because sometimes finding family doesn't come from blood alone. It comes from choosing to stay, choosing to care, and learning, one laugh at a time, how to smile again. Asterisk, the stars outside were calm. But inside the ship, alarms screamed like wounded animals. Red lights blinked across the control panel. Warning of breach attempts at 2 docking ports. John snapped awake, his hand already on his blaster. He dashed to the cockpit, scanning the sensors, 3 ships and marked, fast. And moving into attack formation, they weren't just watching anymore, they were here to take her. He ran back to the bunk, heart pounding like war drums. Really was sitting up, her eyes wide with fear. What's happening? She asked, her voice small. Listen to me, really, John said firmly. Kneeling in front of her, you need to hide now. She nodded. No arguments. He led her to the emergency crawl space under the engine room. He opened the hatch and helped her slide in. There's a blanket, food bar, and a vent you can breathe through. He said, I'll come get you, no matter what. Her hands grabbed his sleeve. You promise? He leaned in, forehead touching hers. Cross my heart, little star. He closed the hatch and locked it from the outside, then turned toward war. Back on the bridge, the first impact hit. The ship rocked, metal groaned. Sparks flew from a busted panel. They had launched EMP burst, trying to disable systems. John rerouted power and activated auto turrets. He strapped on body armor and loaded the heavy blaster. The second impact cracked the outer hull. One of the raiders had attached a boarding claw. John moved through the corridors with silent steps, each one measured, deadly. He waited behind a bulkhead. Blaster aimed at the docking hatch. HISS, the seal broke. Smoke poured in, followed by 3 armored figures with glowing visors and shock rifles. John didn't wait. His first shot hit the leader straight in the chest. Blasting him back through the hatch, the other 2 ducked and returned fire. But John was faster. He slid across the floor, aimed low, and fired 1 shot. 2 shots, clean and sharp. They dropped, twitching. More were coming. He sprinted to the next hull, set traps, laser tripwires, magnetic grenades, flash bursts. He moved like a ghost, invisible in his own ship. But this wasn't just a battle. This was his home, and they had brought war into it. Down in the engine room, really clutched her knees. Breathing slowly, she could hear the explosions. The blaster shots, the heavy footsteps above, tears slipped down her cheeks. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry again, but she was scared, terrified. Then she remembered his words. I'll come get you, no matter what, she believed. Him. Even now, back on the upper deck, John kicked open the cargo hold door. 3 more raiders had landed, one setting up a plasma torch. John shot the tool from the alien's hand, then ducked behind crates. Bring me the girl. One of them shouted, You can walk away if you do. You picked the wrong ship, John growled. He tossed a flashbang and stormed forward. His armor took 2 hits, but he didn't slow. One elbow smashed a raider's jaw. The blaster punched through another's chest plate. The third tried to run. John tackled him to the floor. Who sent you? He barked. Just a name. The alien gasped. Valak. He wants her DNA. John knocked him out and tied him to a pipe, and sprinted back toward the crawlspace. Heart racing, he opened the hatch and really launched into his arms. You're okay, she whispered, crying against his chest. He held her tighter than ever before. "So are you," he said, his voice shaking. "So are you." They sat like that for a long time. The ship was damaged, but they were alive. That was all. That mattered later, in the quiet. John moved the unconscious prisoner to a stasis pod. He planned to deliver him to the nearest patrol station for answers and for justice. He returned to Riley and sat beside her in the medbay. "You were very brave," he said softly. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I remembered. You promised." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, and I meant it, outside. Stars continued to burn quietly, but inside the ship, a new fire had been lit, stronger, brighter, deeper. John wasn't just a captain anymore. He was a father, a shield, a storm waiting to break, and anyone who tried to take her again would find themselves broken first. The engines were damaged, but the ship still flew. The stars outside moved slowly now, like they were watching, listening, waiting, inside. Silence filled the air, not fear, not sorrow, but something heavier, deeper. It was the silence of change. John stood in the cockpit, hands on the controls below his feet. Pieces of the ship still sparked from the battle behind him. In the captain's chair, wrapped in a blanket, sat Riley, hugging her knees. Her face was tired, her body bruised, but her eyes were different now. They held no fear, no tears, only one question. "Dad, where do we go now?" she asked softly. John turned around and knelt beside her. "I was thinking about that," he said gently, "and I figured, maybe we don't need to run anymore." Really looked confused. "But what if they come back?" "They might," John admitted, "but this time we don't hide, we go forward. To a place where no one can touch you." He stood and tapped the console, bringing up a map of nearby systems. "There's a world," he said, pointing. "Not on any official chart screen. Quiet, far from trade lines, used to be a supply outpost. Now abandoned, really blinked. Can we live there?" "We can build something there," he replied. "A home, not just a ship. No alarms. No locked doors, no hiding." She slowly smiled. "Will there be flowers?" John chuckled. "If not, we'll plant them." The ship moved slowly, but it was steady. As they entered jump space, the stars stretched and twisted. Riley stood beside him, her small hand resting on his. They didn't speak. The silence between them said more than words ever could. When they arrived, the planet below looked untouched. Lush forests, soft rivers, open skies with twin moons. No cities, no signals. No danger, just peace. John landed the ship on a small hill near a lake. They stepped out together for the first time in days. The grass touched their ankles, and warm wind brushed their faces. Riley laughed and spun in a circle, her arms out like wings. "I can smell real air," she said, "not ship air." John smiled, watching her dance in the sun. It was the first time he saw her as more than a survivor. She was a child again. Over. The next few days, they set up a small shelter using parts from the ship. Riley helped build it, even though the hammer was too heavy and the nails never listened. She named it Star House because, as she said, it's the only place where stars get to rest. John didn't argue. She had earned that right every night. They sat by a fire and watched the sky. Riley would ask him stories about Earth, about space wars, about ancient ships. He told her everything, and every night, before she fell asleep, she would whisper, "I'm glad you found me." And every night he would whisper back, "No, little star. You found me." Then one morning, while collecting river water, a drone flew overhead. It carried a Federation mark, probably a patrol looking for lost ships. John stepped in front of Riley and waved. The drone hovered, scanned him, and then spoke. "Identify child." John held out her ID band, freshly printed just days ago. "Riley Vell," he said firmly, "registered as my daughter." The drone processed the data, then flashed green. Status. Family confirmed, it said. Then it flew away. Really looked up at him. You gave me your name. I gave you what should have always been yours, he said. A name, a home, and a future. That night, they added one more thing to the outside of their shelter, a hand-painted wooden sign. It read, Vel Family We. Stay together. The past was gone. The war, the slavers, the dark alleys. The bounty hunters, none of it mattered now. All that mattered was this small hill, this tiny fire, this new life. And the girl who once tugged on his shirt in the rain and asked, "Can I call you Dad?" John looked at her now, curled up beside him under the stars. She was safe, she was smiling, and she was his. He whispered gently into the night, "You never have to ask again, little star. You already are mine."